you have leaky energy, then you're going to want to watch this. We go into all things dating dynamics, relationships, masculine, feminine polarity, shame, and the trauma that holds us back from truly living a beautiful life. My friend and I, Joshua, we're going to go deep. Check it out.
Now we're on.
How good is it being here with you?
So good, brother.
So good, man.
So
good. We have so much to talk about and all the things to talk about and not enough time.
Exactly. And we both like to talk.
Yeah, we do. Oh, my Lord. My profession is one where it does generally require a lot of talking, and I genuinely love not talking.
Same. I just like the peace where you're just like, get to be around each other and enjoy it. And there's a lot to say.
Yeah, which I feel that in your presence, actually. I feel it's just nice to just be relaxed. It can be nice and easy, nice and like just softened, because you're such a just trusting, just lovely human.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Yeah.
I feel like we both have a lot of range. So we can either go deep into challenging each other, also deep into empathetic listening. And when each other just needs a little bit of love or support or empathy, the neutral space of just being, enjoying the presence, and also the challenge, which I think that range of expression is usually, I know we've talked about this before, is what's missing in a lot of men. They typically can either go challenge, but they struggle with this side, or they can go here, but they struggle with the challenge. So it's been nice to deepen our brotherhood and friendship where we can be met in so many areas.
Well, I truly believe it's trust, man. It's the leaning into the risk of vulnerability and being open and truthful with each other, and that being met with compassion, with empathy, with understanding, with non-judgment, which builds trust, which then holds the capacity for range. Like, I don't think men can challenge each other, and this is, I think, a big part of the problem. I'd love to hear your perspective on this, is I don't think men can challenge each other in healthy ways when they lack trust. And we all know one of the greatest wounds of the masculine is, I'm in competition with you, therefore I don't trust you, and I can't trust you.
Yeah, I think that's a really big piece of it. I also think certain men trigger each other's wounds.
Say more to that.
And so like oftentimes we're projecting onto each other our fathers or the men that we couldn't trust in childhood. And so they represent this image of somebody else. So it's hard to trust them because unconsciously they represent an energy or a similar energy to something we couldn't trust in childhood.
And if we don't engage in self-exploration, we don't cultivate self-awareness, which ultimately can lead, doesn't always, because sometimes we just get stuck in the awareness stage of knowing shit about ourselves but never doing anything about it. But ideally leading to self-healing, and you don't heal those wounds, we're just going to constantly unconsciously project. I mean, I still do it. Like, I'd like to think and say, I'm an integrated man, as you are, and for the most part, I believe I am, and I feel that I am, and I know that I am. And there are still times where I catch myself projecting, and it may be months later, I'm like, oh, that's why I've had an issue with that guy. That's why I've had a feeling. It wasn't so much an intuition, it was actually an unconscious projection that was me judging that person because of something unhealed within me. And these aren't things from years ago or anything. This is in the now.
I have that too. I feel like the distinction is, are we aware of it? And can we own that? And I feel like that's the big distinction. And I find where men can't own it is where they get stuck in it, versus like, just as you mentioned a minute ago, the introspection to go, okay, even if it's later, oh, wow, I can own this piece of me. I can own where this is still showing up. And I feel like that's what creates the safety. And that's what rebuilds the trust, is the ownership piece of continually learning where we're falling down. And I find the more we go into our wounds, which is the introspection, like the more we go back and look, where am I triggered? Where do I track this? What's this man reflecting in me that's going on in my childhood? It's scary to go there and it's uncomfortable to go there. But the more we go there, the more we excavate, the more comfortable we get going there. And we see it as a sense of power versus a weakness that we're trying to cover up or hide. So I feel like that is the distinguishing piece from integration to not integration. Not that we have it all figured out or that we're there yet, but that we're a continual work in progress. And we have the awareness to take ownership when we catch ourselves falling and like, I fell there.
Yeah. And I think to take ownership very much requires us being in an energetic or a practice of elevating our self-worth. Because to be able to take ownership of something that you don't like about yourself, or that you carry disdain towards, or a negative charge, or a big feeling, a density about that, or you have other people's voices or society's voice in your head telling you this thing that you are is wrong, and there's shame attached to that. If you don't have an elevated sense of self-worth, or you're not working on your own value, your intrinsic value of just being you, in other words, you're not needing to be externally validated, you won't be able to look at those wounds. And like in my own life, I've avoided the times where I've avoided my wounds and avoided my stuff have really been the times where I'm so insecure, I'm so down on myself that I'm compensating with all these external things like status seeking or trying to make money or athleticism or adrenaline or whatever it is, right? Like numbing, compensatory stuff. I just avoid looking at my wounds because I don't have a base of confidence and self-worth to say, oh, I can own this now. There's going to be some shame. There's going to be some maybe pushback from people like my brothers that are going to challenge me and people in my life that want to look out for me and want to call me forward. I'll just hide that because it's easier. It's more convenient. And the times where my self-worth, I'm in deliberate practice of elevating my value and worth, not the distinction between arrogance and confidence, as we know, right? But those are the times where I've been able to take deeper levels of ownership, have greater vulnerability and openness and transparency with my brothers. When I'm called forward, I am less reactive, sometimes still reactive, but less reactive, to the point where I can absorb what is being said and I can sit with it and discern my own. Okay, does this suit me? Is there truth to what this man is saying? Is it truth to what my partner is saying? Those are the times where I can hold that. But when I'm not in self-worth, forget about it.
Yeah, and two additional pieces on that. One, we have to trust the people that are around us, back to the trust conversation, to even be able to receive that feedback without looking at it or internalizing it as shame or being excavated out of the group or not belonging, which is a trigger into the wound. And I feel like the second piece is I feel like I've been going through that phase in my life currently of like, okay, let me go into the areas that I've been avoiding and let me feel those areas. And it's really difficult because I noticed in a lot of areas I felt insecure. And so having to be in the insecure is like paralyzing. It's like, oh man, who am I without my ability to achieve or my ability for hard driving, my athleticism, or, I mean, I guess what I'm learning is it's not just the money because the money's coming in. I'm like, oh, okay, that area is handled, but I'm going in all these other areas or pockets that I've been avoiding and having to sit in the insecurity of that or the lack of confidence in that. And it can be super humbling, but I'm finding the more I can just sit in that and the more I can find grace in that, I build the worth up. I build the self-worth up from being willing to go where I haven't been willing to go before, but it's just challenging. And I can understand why we avoid it as men, like so uncomfortable to not have something to stand on. It's almost like, where's my ground? For me, it was like, let me put everything in boxes. Let me control the structure. Let me control everything. And if it's all controlled, I got it all handled. Who am I without the control? Who am I like?
Such an integral part of your character, right?
Yeah. So it's like my whole identity. And I think that's what we're doing is we're learning to go into our identity, which is the strongest force in the human psychology. I think Tony Robbins said the strongest need of a human is to stay congruent with the sense of identity of who we see.
The perception of self. Yeah.
So like when we go into that, we lose like, where am I? Who am I? What am like? How do I show up? How do I behave? Right? Yeah, it's like, how do I behave? How do I show up? Who am I? The things I was using to get status or to claim power, I take those away from myself. And who am I? Yeah. So I think it's a deeply challenging, and I know it's the journey we're both on. You're going through reinvestigating everything as well, and kind of going like, who am I with? Almost like very similar to me.
Yeah, you said.
Who am I without the structure? And I prune the things away that I have gotten structure from. Who am I without that? And what does life look like? And it's a lot. I think it's an integration of the masculine, feminine. Like we're learning to. It seems like every time I deepen my feminine aspects, I deepen my masculine. But the feminine is I'm letting go of my control, my structure, my direction for a little bit. And that's the scary part. Like, okay, I got to let go of this for a little bit and surrender into it. And then in that spaciousness, similar to what I see with women too, like they go on a journey from this rigidness to creating more space in their body, space in their life. And then it all comes together. I'm finding the same thing in myself. Yeah. I'm curious, are you going through that or discover the same process?
Well, it's a very deep trustful, isn't it? Surrender and acceptance. You know, I was told the other day, I'm curious your perspective on this. Someone said to me, this lady that's a healer, she uses various modalities, lovely human. Anyway, she said, Americans generally don't like the term surrender. Meaning, and what she meant was, you know, just related to the Civil War and just related to America's cultural history and socioeconomic history, I guess. Whereas for me, when I think of the term surrender and acceptance, I don't think complacency. I don't think giving up. I think leaning into deep trust. It's faith. It really, for me, it really is. There's something moving me towards changing my behavior or exploring a new way of being and seeing myself through a different lens. In other words, identity reshaping, right? And it's going to require me to not know where I'm going and to not know what I'm falling into or moving into, because by default, knowing where I'm going with precision is simply perpetuating an old ideology or old way of being that's actually not serving me. And there's something to be said for the great mystery, which to me is a feminine embodiment. So when you say, when you speak to leaning deeper into the feminine, my masculine expands as well. My words, not yours, but the masculine expands. I think it works both ways, right? Especially if we hold an intention of deepening, right? Deepening and also allowing. Like that's part of the if you like, a category, if we were to box it in, of acceptance, surrender, allowance, right? Like, which is also part of receiving. And then for me, when I allow myself again to receive, I'm going to come back to self-worth. I don't think we can actually receive in great depth or in fullness if we don't value ourselves enough, because we won't allow ourselves to receive the gifts or even the unknown or whatever it may be. And then from the point of giving or initiating as the masculine, you cannot surrender and accept without initiation of that thing. So you have to, this is where there's no separation in everything that we do. And the distinction for me exists simply for contrast, for learning, for dissecting, for understanding, for connecting to, for simplifying it for our own minds, right? But you can't initiate, or so you can't have acceptance, surrender, receiving, trusting without initiating an action towards that, which is masculine. So to me, this is the beautiful dance of the masculine and the feminine in a sense.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think that's why they both get stronger, because
That's right.
It is directional to choose the line, or you're using the language initiation to go, I'm going to choose faith takes masculine choice, direction. I'm going this way. I'm going to choose to have faith and surrender. And then stepping into that is the unknown, which is like the abyss of like, what could this mean? I let go of my structure, my control, my direction. And then in that, I really loved what you said is getting attuned to receiving, because that's what I'm, at least the current iteration that I'm at. I'm learning it's about, if I'm here to serve the field, if I'm here to serve consciousness, I'm here to serve God. To me, it's like the field. And I'm learning to go like, what's the field asking from me? Even for new clients that show up, I'm like, oh, okay, it's almost like there's the wave patterns. And then when the wave's up, it's when things are moving and flow comes and energetic comes and new clients come and I got energy and movement and things are moving. And then when there's contraction, it's like expansion, contraction. And I go into contraction, that's when I have to have the faith to surrender, to have faith, to let go into the contraction. And then the contraction can be here for a little while. And there can even be these moments, I observe it as going up and down, and then there's space in the up and the down. And I think that's where I'm learning to let go of my structures of contraction. Like when it would contract, I would go into sex, working out, training, something to like override the contraction, which would make me feel safe. To not feel it, which would make me feel safe. But I'm learning if I can relax into the contraction, if I can relax into the faith and then become present, what like you mentioned, what's there to receive? And then I'm like, oh, my cats want to go play outside.
Yeah.
So instead of sitting on the couch watching a movie that doesn't make any sense, or eating food and filling myself up with calories I don't want, with something I don't want to engage in, or used to be dating apps or porn or anything else. Now it's like, or sex. Now it's like, oh, I'm in this heavy contracted space. There's nothing in my field that's causing contraction. Let me just accept that I'm here right now. Have faith that this is where I'm supposed to be, as Byron Katie says. How do I know it's here? How do I know it's supposed to be here? Because it's here.
Because it's here and I'm here.
And then how do I get really present? Like, oh, my cats want to go outside. Can I go out, get out in nature? Can I go be really present? And if I'm able to move into that, then I find I start to enjoy the contraction a little bit more. But it's still this flow that I think is continually changing. And so I think that's at least what I'm observing is, can I move how nature moves? Can I move, which is directional and
that's the range you're speaking
it's the range.
Yeah. It's interesting because the contraction that you're speaking to, instead of numbing it and avoiding it, you're feeling it, and it still releases, it still softens. It just softens in a more meaningful way because you've actually moved through it as opposed to trying to go around it. And I don't think we can avoid contraction. I don't think we're meant to, right? This is part of the duality that we live in. And because we live in a society and a culture that is about quick fixes and short-term gratification, that, destroys us, I think, hormonally. It messes with our physiology. It messes with our relational psychology as well. And if we just, again, the paradox is if we allow the contraction to take place and we trust ourselves enough, trust the people in our lives enough, we trust our own processes, and this comes down to doing self-work and being more self-aware and having tools to pull from, we can be with the contraction as opposed to running away from it. And in being with it, not only does it soften and eventually dissipate, but we learn something very valuable 99.9% of the time along the way about ourselves. At least that's been my experience, right? And so a lot of the work that I do now with clients, so much of it is just helping them feel what they don't want to feel or what they think is going to break them if they feel it. And I'm like, cool, let it break you. Not to the point where it, quote unquote, breaks you, but let it break you a little bit. Then come back. Feel a little dysregulated. Give yourself an experience of coming back into regulation and feeling grounded again. Live to fight another day. Tomorrow, maybe you go a little further. You go a little deeper. It doesn't, titration, pendulation, slow is smooth is fast. It doesn't have to be jumping in the deep end with great white sharks. It can be, but it doesn't have to be that. And I'm finding that in my own life when I actually can meet and greet all these experiences with equanimity and with a neutrality. There's no bias. Oh, well, that's a happy experience. Let me just move only towards that. But that's good. Of course, we're going to want to do that. We want desirable experiences. But if I'm constantly avoiding my anger and my sadness, and when I'll get into that in a moment, but I'm just not winning. I feel like I'm literally losing in life. And that's when I plummet then into the victim, into the self-perpetual victim.
Yeah, and that's what I was tracking, is because that's where I see it's very similar to you. It's with clients, my clients are like, can I have a safe, trusting place to go with me on the journey, to create safety while I do go into the abyss, and to help guide that process, to be like, you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then in that safety, it's like, oh, we find safety in ourselves. We find safety with God. We find safety with that spaciousness. And I find the layer right above it is the villain, victim, savior, that drama triangle, because as we're dropping down to the contraction, this feels so uncomfortable. It's much easier to go somewhere else because we're face to face with us in that contraction.
Yeah.
Initially, I find as we're going down, it's like, oh, I have to face, if I take away the blame from either being a victim, making somebody else the villain, or trying to go save everybody else to avoid that. When we drop down, then it's like, okay, it's just me. And I find it's an ego dissolve.
There's no masks anymore.
There's no mask, and they become face to face with us. We're the dragon that we've been fighting. And in it, there's a deep compassion, or usually a deep heartbreak from the grief work. That's kind of how I see the world through, is like, at some level, we're heartbroken, and we're deeply heartbroken.
It's always grief. I don't want to be absolute with it, but let me just say this: almost always grief. It's a sense of loss. It's a sense of expectations not being met. Whether it's our parents weren't who we wanted them to be, whether we moved home and I didn't want to, whether my brother died, like whatever it is, there's a loss there. And it's so intense. And you know this through the work that you've done on yourself and with so many. We just avoid the loss. But to me, again, there can be, and I'm going to tell you what, man, I was speaking with a friend. I'll finish my sentence. There can be a beauty in the loss. And what I'm going to say to that, I was speaking to a friend this morning, and he's got two little girls, 3 and 5. And we were talking about death because tragically, one of his friends died in a car accident a couple of weeks ago. Young mother, couple of kids, really sad, man, just life, right? And I said to him, he was talking about, I have an interesting relationship with death. I said, so do I, man, until I had my girl. He goes, yeah, me too. Things have shifted for me massively, man. And in saying that, having her as well has also shifted the way I approach my inner work. Like, there was this, it's less now, but there was this sense of urgency. First, there was complete avoidance. It's like I regressed to this immature, unconscious, non-integrated, just immature, fragmented man. Initially, I just didn't want to look at my stuff. After having my baby, because I have a belief and a vantage point of life where when we have really big life experiences, whatever, there's variations to that of what it looks like. We often layers of our old stuff will come up, to work with and just to be with, because this big life experience, like having a child, just opens you up in a new way. It's time for an up-leveling, right? And they come in many different forms. It's just my example now. And so I started with just complete avoidance, and then I moved into this sense of urgency. Like I need to fix myself. I need to look at this thing, because if I don't, then what's going to happen to my daughter? She's so impressionable, and it's like the more you know, sometimes the more difficult it is, right? It's like ignorance truly is bliss. And now I'm just coming into this place of the desire to change and shift is not just for the people that I care about, yourself, my wife, my friends, my daughter, like my parents, my brother, but for myself, of course. But it's coming from a place of this experience of having a child has opened me up, and it's my duty, I believe, that with this awareness to do something with this now, to not sit on it, right? And that's a very masculine approach. I get that. But part of that, man, for me has been massive surrender, into, I've been leaning into God a lot more, which interestingly enough, I have not spoken about that publicly. And it's not, I'm not embarrassed. I feel a little strange with it, because when I was younger, just experiencing what I did with the volatility and the violence in my family, I can't remember how old I was exactly. I think I was maybe like 10. I must have been 10 years old. And I remember praying to God, basically saying, F you, God, I'm done. Like I am done because all the violence and the beatings and the, peeing my pants all the time, because I was just so scared, and, I'm done. And ever since then, it took me many years to come back to God. And I think that was a critical point in my life, where now that I'm coming back to God in a deeper way, like this permeating presence and mystery, like leaning deeper into the feminine as well, like there's something to be said for that, but again, like when I say something to be said for that, for me personally, like it's really helping me shift my life in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think it's a valid conversation, because I see so many people. I think what I'm observing in you as you're talking about this is, what do our children bring up in us?
Yeah.
From our past? And I see that so often, is that the children bring up stuff in us that we don't realize they're triggering our little boy or our little girl of unresolved grief and sadness. And so often we want to control it or do differently to them than we had to us. And I find oftentimes we're just recreating the same thing. And so I love what you're describing as an introspective look at like, what's coming up in me? I remember one of our mutual friends had shared when their child, when he saw his like little girl, he's like, I'm so triggered. And then I have to go like, what am I getting triggered by? And how do I look at this that's coming up?
Yeah.
And
what's represented within me?
What's representing my little boy that's like, didn't get what she has now? Or, you might be giving them an amazing life, and you're like, I didn't get that. And they're triggered on this. I had this, or whatever the story is. But I think it's a really valid topic that a lot of people struggle with, is how do we parent? Because nobody got the manual on parenting. Our parents didn't get the manual on parenting. They did the best they could with what they learned, which is, I think, breaking that ancestral curse that runs so through. The through line is like multiple generations of parents not having healthy parenting, because we were living in different times where there was more survival and a lot of adaptations to past grief. And I think my belief is a lot of it's war-based, and all this trauma in our culture and society is just passed into the culture. But I think now we're at a like raising consciousness where we're waking up, because we're not threatened with things threatening our life at the same level that they have been in the past. And we're able to we're in like the philosopher's age again, where we're all like becoming philosophers, and everybody's a philosopher. And we have more mental health problems than we've ever had, because we're stuck philosophizing, right? Versus actually fighting for our life. Yeah, we're over here, versus a lot of what we've been talking about is how do we get into here?
Yeah.
How do we feel the grief and the sadness? And I think the reason it's so hard is we're not just doing it for us, we're doing it for our whole lineage. And the multiple generations of lineage that haven't processed their grief and trauma, we're now doing it. And as we do, I think that's where it like opens up a little bit, is we start to like process the layers and the layers and the layers of whatever's heavy in us. And then it starts to open up to like, oh, that conversation earlier of the contraction versus the lightness. The only way we can remove away the thing that's causing it is as we feel the different layers that's there. And as we feel one layer, there's a whole bunch more layers. And then we feel the next layer, and we feel the next layer. And pretty soon we've felt so many layers, even like the childhood layers that had no words or no memories attached to it. And then at some point, I think then we can get to a more of a neutral space where we're just feeling the flow of up and down, unless something shows up like a child, a spouse, a business partner, a loss of some other kind that shows up in our life. But I think these are all really valuable awarenesses and insights, to pay attention to. So thank you so much for sharing your process of your journey, because I know there's very different, parents react very differently to children.
Yeah, man, I just had a real-time realization that I'm going to share with you. Literally real-time, first time I've had this realization, because I've been thinking about what is it, because my daughter doesn't trigger me. I love her so deeply, man. I care for her so deeply. She just, her light, her joy, you've seen her, man. Like she's just she's just so special to me. And I know I'm very biased, right? But I've been really down and in this victim place lately, because she's gone through this, she's gone through this phase again of no daddy. And I'm just taking it personally. And logically and rationally, I'm not offended by her. I'm just trying to rattle my head like, what am I doing? Like, am I being desperate and needy? Am I giving off that energy that she's pushing me away? Like, what's going on? Like, I'm really doing my best to take responsibility, and I'm struggling because I keep plummeting in shame and victimhood and all of it, right? And it's confusing because when she's with me, just her and I, man, it's just phenomenal. It's just the connection. I mean, the connection's there when there's other people there. It's just, she's not interested in daddy, and not that she's not only is she not interested, she's like the energy of pushing away. And I'm like, I'm the common denominator in my life. So there's something here, but here's a realization I just had. I think I've been projecting on her. What did I really need when I was her age, around, 26 months, 2 years, whatever it was, right? And I didn't have, by my memory, my somatic memory, right? I didn't have an attentive father like I am attentive to her. Like even, I told you, hey man, I got to leave here by a certain time because I want to get back for bedtime routine. I don't have to get back. I want to get back for bedtime routine. And I'm noticing in the areas as well where I rush things or I'm not present with her, and I'm quote unquote fixing that. I'm doing better to remedy that and being aware of that. But the realization I just had was I never had the father that I am to her. And I think that's what's actually triggering me. And that's why I even caught myself the other day saying, I was telling Christine, it feels like she's just not grateful. I'm like, she's 2 fucking years old. She says it's not about gratitude. She's 2 years old. She's not like 15 here. You know what I'm saying? Like I can be rational, but I'm also somatically irrational. And that's the realization I just had. And that awareness is very important, because I can work with that now in a deeper way. I can work with that little boy and say, hey, I got you too. I got you. And that's my daughter. And I'm always going to have her. And I'm always going to have you. There's plenty of love to go around, like that realization is important. As I was rattling my head, like, I don't know, 2 years old, what was going on? But the message that came to me was that I didn't have the available, attentive father that she has. And because she's pushing me away, there's part of me, this immature part of self, which again, I'm not, it's embarrassing to say, but fuck it, I'm going to say it, is I'm like, oh, if you're going to be like that, well, I don't want to be near you. Man.
But it makes total sense now that you're
unpacking
it. Is like,
big time.
Man, that's all I wanted was a father that was present.
Big time.
And I didn't feel
90%
safe.
of men want that.
And you didn't have safety. You didn't have an attuned father. You didn't have a present father. So the fact that you're like, I'm giving you all the things that I didn't have and I'm being rejected for it, it can be really triggering, right? I can see how that experience of your wounded child in the somatic body is going, this is everything I wanted. And now I'm giving it and it's not met, or I'm giving it and it's not received.
It's that, man.
And so then it's like it's re-triggering the wounded child to react the ways which make total sense.
And her behavior and her response and reaction to me is really a deep opportunity for me to be with this little boy. Otherwise, I wouldn't see it if she wasn't doing it. And he's always going to be there, and it's just going to leak out in other ways that may not be as obvious. So it really is a beautiful blessing. And I'll tell you something else. When I shifted from that victimhood maybe like 2 days ago, immediately, I genuinely shifted from it. Like my body was different. Immediately. Mum's there as well. She goes like this to me. To pick her up, and then she just rests her little head here, which is very unusual for Athena. She does it more and more lately, and she just wanted to be with daddy. It shows me, and it shows us, like how attuned children are, how really tapped in they are, man.
Yeah, it almost just feels like she's become this feminine teacher. Like what
massively.
What a beautiful teacher of like, because she's just reacting to her somatic body.
Yeah.
Well, she's reacting to it energetically. And I think that's what you were mentioning earlier is she sensed the little bit of something that told her nervous system not safe.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that's
then
it.
as soon as you're like, now it's safe again.
I need to look at that. Another way how I could approach this, and this isn't just, I'm just speaking for me because this is my experience, but I think for all of us is instead of pointing fingers energetically, directly, indirectly, unconsciously, consciously, whatever, it's like, oh, great. This truth teller is showing me something about me because all they know is truth at this age, especially, they're just going to be truthful. So she's behaving exactly as she needs to be. And it's insight for me.
Well, and I know it's a totally different parallel, but how I can relate to that conversation, because I don't have children yet, is with my cats.
Yeah, it's still a parallel, man.
And it's the same thing when I'm when I'm needy, they don't want to be anywhere around me. The more at peace I am with me, and the more attuned I am to them, just being present.
Because you're more at peace with yourself.
Yeah, the more and more peace I get,
spacious.
like I'm seeing our whole relationships changing with my cats, which is like my girl's like almost becoming a little anxious because I'm so much more present and so much more attuned that she's almost like, where are you going? Follows me around. I'm like this, and she comes and lays down on the couch next to me. She like, it's just a very different relationship that I've always been like, oh, that's my independent girl.
It's like pickup artistry. The pickup artistry community is what they're going to tell you. Play it cool. Don't get back to them. Play it cool.
Yeah. And
reject them.
Yeah. And the funniest thing is it's none of that. It's just presence, attunement. And so they've become my teachers of when they're needing attention. Do I have a moment to give them attention, or am I too busy? When they are meowing or letting me know something, can I listen to that? And so for me, I'm using that as a pattern to go like, I want to have a family and my daughter or my son needs attention. Am I going to be like, I don't have time for that right now. I'm busy. Or am I like, all right, let me create the spaciousness in my schedule to attune what's going on. What do you need? So that's how I'm relating to what you're saying. It doesn't trigger the same wounded child parts of me yet. I think that'll come when I have a child, but it definitely has been teaching me when I'm on or when I'm off, or just by there, because they're energetic creatures.
Yeah.
And when my energy's safe, they want to be around me, and they constantly want to be around me. When I'm not safe, I may think I'm okay, but they're like, get away from me. Don't get near me. And then my reactions to try to deal with that rejection make them want to run further or hide from me. Yeah. So it's a very interesting experience.
I think what preludes the safety is when you're grounded in yourself and when we're grounded in ourselves and we're not erratic, then we can be safe because we're stable. People don't have to guess. Another person's nervous system doesn't need to guess where we're at because it's very clear where we're at. We're locked in, we're grounded, we're slow, we're well paced, we're aware of ourselves, we're quote unquote conscious, like we're aware of other people's, like you're aware of your cat's experience. You're aware of the living beings in your life and their experience, and you're demonstrating curiosity, whether it's nonverbal or verbal. That goes a long way for people. I wish, I was again speaking about this morning, how the general schooling system is really an extension of industrial training, right? I wish at schools, to speak for myself in my school, I wish we were taught more about human behavior and relationships and intimacy and working with shame and just real. I'm not saying STEM is bad or anything like that. Maths is great, science is great. I just wish there was more fundamental ways of, we're relational beings, like really learning how to be with ourselves and with others. But school isn't designed for that. It's designed to create worker bees.
Well, and interesting enough on that same subject line, that's where I find everything fell off. That's where rites of passage with men fell off.
Big time.
It's where grief and trauma and all the emotions fell off. Like everything was stunted by industrial revolution of like, oh no, you're going to work and you're going to be machines, and how efficient can we get you? And so that's our whole upstream of multiple generations of the downstream of debris we have now is for when we became robotic and really stopped being relational beings and started being machines. And then if we weren't machine enough, that's where a lot of the cultural narratives around masculinity came in, of what is a masculine man. Oh, he's the stoic worker bee that handles the job and is this tough guy that gets the job done and doesn't have any needs, so he can work more efficiently, right? It's the husband that shows up very masculine, but emotionally dead inside, right? So we've been conditioned these different norms, I think, of now there's these big waves of coming back. And I will say we've also created a lot of pain, I think, as men in general. That's kind of how I observe that, is a lot of suppression, and that suppression came out as feeling victimized, and then we took it out on the world.
Yeah, we sought control because we experienced a lack of control, autonomy, sovereignty, and safety in our own lives growing up. So many men grow up without fathers, without father figures, without appropriate guidance, without appropriate familiar guidance, man to man, so to speak. We've spoken about this before around men really needing cultural rites of passage because we lack a biological rites of passage, right? Like we don't know that we lack it. It's just not as distinct as females, which is the menstrual cycle. Like, you are now a woman now. Like you are now a woman in many respects, not in all respects, of course. That takes time. It takes time for us to come into our manhood, into our womanhood, etc. But there's more distinction there, whereas men don't have that. And if that's stripped away from us, left to our own devices, especially what we've got massive amounts of testosterone surging through us, I mean, we're gonna seek the attention, we're gonna seek the external validation, the approval through the most extreme ways that we can. And then more dysfunction takes place and society shuns us. So we hold on to more shame, and we're not taught this is the cycle, we're not taught how to then, or shown how to be with our emotions, and we're shunned for having emotions, namely sadness, grief, that type of thing. And then we pack that away as well. And so we go through the world and we need to compensate. So we're going to be the best things that we can be, the best version of ourselves. So you've got wounded, immature, broken, traumatized leaders leading military, leading countries, leading large corporations that have massive influence on the direction of our cultural world, right? It's crazy, man. You could pick all the top leaders and look at, you could, I mean, this is an informal assessment, obviously, but you could break down and look at how hurt they are and how they've been carrying that for 5, 6, 7 decades.
I'm just going to go and then turn to... Yeah, I think you make a really good point when we talk about the leaders of our country and who's leading culture. And I think this is an interesting pathway to getting into like the dark side of the masculine, the dark side of the feminine, because, there's this huge suppression it's all upstream. So all this suppression happened upstream, suppressed all of our emotions, took away our power, essentially, or who we had to be in the world to get power, our utility, what's our worth, what's our value. And then the more power we get, we feel more powerful, which is that accumulation that's happening, right? And so the accumulation of status, wealth, achievements, the feminine, like anything we can get to take control over or own or possess builds more power from that engine, because we're trying to fill an empty void. That's
not being enough or not feeling enough.
Like I'm not feeling enough, so let me acquire. Now I'm enough. Oh, now I'm not enough again, so let me keep going outward, acquire more. Yet meanwhile, inside we haven't addressed the worthiness, which is the root of all of this, which I think we keep coming back to. So I'll just keep accumulating. And I see that as one of these big sides of the dark side of the masculine, is the savage man who's trying to accumulate more power, to feel more control, to feel adequate, which is never going to be enough. And in the wake of that, the cultures we build in corporations, the cultures we build in government, the cultures we build in military are a not enough culture, where everything I see it in some of my clients who have these massive companies that are shifting out of that. And it's the same phase we've been talking about, what they have to shift out of to go into this whole other facing identity, feeling all the messy shit. They have to go against that. So it's easier just to stay with it. But I've seen so many people.
It's convenient to stay with it too.
Well, it's convenient to stay with it. It's convenient and attractive up until it's not. And then when things start to fall apart,
Up until you start to awaken.
well, and I find that that's usually because there's a bang event that happens, and the bang event, either they face it all, they address it, they go into it, or I find they just put their head in the sand, and then
It's
more
gonna be a
starts to
series
fall
of
away.
bang events, yeah.
That just
That was
keeps
for
getting
me.
worse and worse and worse and worse until they hit rock bottom, or they do the work to reshift that. But I think whoever ends up listening to this, if they're still driven by not enough, they're probably in a culture or they're in a dating
reinforces
relationship
that as well.
that reinforces not enough. So they're constantly trying to be enough, and they're constantly told by their relationship dynamics, by their working environments, by their social environments, they're not enough. And so it's a culture that breeds more not enoughness, right? Versus when you step out of that, it's like, oh, what are my values now? What's my freedom? How am I going to dictate my relationships? What am I going to value people by versus are they enough? Are they at my social status? Are they hot enough? Are they attractive enough? Are they wealthy enough to be in my status? Or who's their heart? How much do they care? How much work have they done? How self-aware are they? How much can I trust them? Right? I think there's these narratives from the dark side of the masculine that is this whole thing of accumulation of power, which, I even see that in the Tates in the world. Now, granted, I like his intelligence. I like his ability to have very great intellectual conversations. I love his confidence that he eludes. I love his power in general.
Yeah, and some of the things that he says, taken in context and even just isolated, I can also resonate and agree with.
Same.
Just a bunch of shit that I don't. Yeah.
Same. And that's kind of the narrative is I think and I see it in the
He's
youth.
polarizing.
He's polarizing and he can hold his ground when he's attacked, I think. And he's showing power to men that haven't felt powerful.
And that's what's attractive for especially young, impressionable men, which can also be dangerous because there's an illusion to what he's presenting as well.
And I think that's one of the reasons I want to speak on that, because that's part of what I see arriving is I see a lot of younger men that are choosing to follow in his stance and they're getting power when they apply the strategies, but they're not seeing the cost.
Well, it's not sustainable power. And you're right. There's a cost to that.
There's a cost to it. It's not sustainable power. And they're going to be like, what's their goal? Is it power or is it happiness?
For the sake of power, like what is it? Yeah.
Yeah, because you end up alone.
Yeah.
Like that's part of the cost is if you're constantly choosing power, then you don't trust anybody and you're trying to take power.
Yeah.
So you're constantly strategizing about how to take more power. And then meanwhile, you don't build safety. You don't build trust. You don't build community. You don't build alignment with similar values. You build a culture of power and everybody around you wants power. Like it's the same thing as the inadequacy. If you're achieving power, you're going to attract power, but you're going to attract the same type of power that you are.
Yeah, and possibly unhealthy competitive power that's going to uproot you if you become more powerful than them, or the desire to uproot you.
That's it. That's why there's no trust in those circles.
That's right.
Because you're competing for who has more powers. It's superficial, so you can't trust anyone.
It's all hidden as well.
And then you view the world as I can't trust anyone, and then you look at that in relationship dynamics. If you can't trust anyone because you're claiming power, then you're choosing partners claiming power. Who can you take power over? You don't trust anything they say, or they're after your power. And so you end up in this very isolated place of constantly on guard. It's alone, but you seem very powerful. You may have a lot of wealth. You may have a lot of status. You may have even your body ripped and in a place because you've been using that for leverage on power. But the cost is you're alone. You can't trust anybody in your environment.
Looking over your shoulder.
Looking over your shoulder. You're highly defensive.
Yeah.
I'd say a partner would experience you as gaslighting or like constantly using control and manipulation.
Arrogant, egoic. You're attached to what you have, can't lose it. Therefore, it comes with contraction and fear.
Yep.
And one thing to speak to as well is the cause is upstream, the effect is downstream of what you were speaking to earlier, which I think is very interesting in terms of when we place ourselves at the center of that, we have to deal with both the upstream and the downstream effect. And back to this piece here around this superficial power that we accumulate. And I get that we're imprinting our values of what we think is important to live a healthy life. Like I get that, right? But even in our relationship as an example, to be honest, man, there's nothing you don't know about me. You know my deepest shame.
Yeah.
There's really, not everyone obviously has, privilege to that. But my point in sharing that is like we talk about finances, we go into the details of numbers, we talk about our relationships, we talk about our sexuality, we talk about our self-worth, we talk about the way we see ourselves and each other. Like we go deep into all of that. As a result of that, I feel I've built an ally in my life, like someone I can genuinely trust. I don't need nor want to be in competition with you. That's very relieving to not have to focus on that, right? As a man in this world, we're in similar spaces. We're constantly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but in my perspective, we're constantly leaning into each other. Well, how do you do this? Because maybe I do it this way. If you do it that way, let's put it together. Like there's this constant collaboration because there's trust there. And we just come back to sort of full circle a little bit. Trust is there because we've taken a risk to be open with each other. And so this darker side, it's not even a dark side, we'll call it the unhealthy side or the darker side of the dark masculine, right? Because there's nothing wrong with wanting to persevere and pursue and be the best version of self, right? But when we start to become oppressive and coercive and dominate, and we start to hurt other people so that we can rise, or we can at least have the perception of we're better than, to me that becomes problematic because we're relational beings. So this is the darker side of, I guess, masculine control that we don't often speak to enough, and that I think our leadership, our global leadership, is riddled with. Like it's absolutely riddled with, man. And it's a systemic thing, and it's I don't necessarily know how you break that at that sort of collective larger level. I don't even think that's even worth asking the question. I think it begins with the individual level and creating sort of like a grassroots movement around that will influence a top-down movement. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, because it feels like a big beast.
It does.
Yeah.
And I feel like I tend to look at it like that shows the current consciousness of the state of the world. Like when I see where our global leaders are, I'm like, oh, okay, this is where we're at.
Yeah,
This
they're
is
representative of
they're
it,
representative
right?
of our global consciousness currently. And what's prevailing is the same conversation we've talked about, where if you're constantly acquiring power and status and trying to be enough, and you have to get it in different ways, which means you're not following a value system. Because if you follow your value system, you may not be enough, you may not get liked, you may not be able to do what you want to do. So instead you compromise your values. In doing so, you lose your ground of who you are in the world. And so now it's about being enough in the circles. And then if everybody's using
You don't
fear,
actually want to be
dominance, manipulation, then you become part of that manipulation of being to survive in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a disruption of the whole ecosystem is the only way that it falls at some point. It breaks at some point. It implodes, which is what happened with Rome. Like if we look at history, history repeats itself. Rome imploded, the most dominant country in the world imploded internally. They weren't beat. They were imploded internally because they got too powerful and they weren't holding their binds, and it internally imploded. And I feel like that's where I think at some point it'll course correct itself. There'll be a death and a rebirth of the current system when it's outdated.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that the only way to learn isn't necessarily through a complete breakdown or hitting of rock bottom. I think it represents that particular structural style of death and rebirth is representative of our consciousness collectively, right? Meaning that we almost, I believe, we need to hit rock bottom. Now, I believe it's not the only way, but we as a collective need to hit rock bottom, meaning that fortunately or unfortunately, the change that may or may not, but probably will come at a collective level, is also going to come with very unpleasant experiences, whether it be war, whether it be physical death, whether it be loss of wealth, massive losses of identity, because our identity is so tethered to, like, you're speaking about manipulation and coercion and oppression and how so much of that is ingrained in our society. And of course, there's goodness in our society as well, but those are pretty dominant, dense forces. Our identities are actually attached to that for survival. And so if we are actively choosing to not be manipulative, to not be coercive, to not be excessively controlling, that's a very difficult thing to do for an individual to walk that path. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's very possible. It's just very difficult. And so we know, again, going back to quick fix, short-term gratification society we live in, not many people are willing to do that work. And so we've got to introduce, in my opinion, is somehow supporting people to start to feel safer in their bodies. Agreed. Not safer than what that's a starting point, safer in their bodies. So they can actually look in a more expansive way at their lives and go, oh, maybe I can diffuse myself from this system. I can be a little different. Yeah, it may come at a cost, but I'm willing to wear that because that characteristic that's tethered to my identity isn't who I want to be anymore. I don't want to be that manipulative person anymore. And I'm willing to risk what's required to tread a different path.
Yeah, I agree. I have a very similar approach of that. It's not at some level. If that's the enemy, then I've still made them the villain, and that which means I'm a victim. And so if I remove them,
Great point.
then I'm just like, how do I shift me? And then once I shift me, how do I shift my circle or change my circle to align? Like, so it's an inside job. For me, the death and the rebirth is, oh, I don't need that. I just can accept this is the way the current state of the consciousness is, but how do we all change from the inside out? Almost like a alien overtaking or like a virus that spreads from a consciousness shift, which is what I see is happening. I feel like we're waking up from the inside and then that eventually spreads out and slowly changes it. Cause you're right. We live in a world until the whole collective world is in the same consciousness, then, oh, everybody starts to go to love and then somebody else will just take over. So it's a survival that I don't know if we'll get to in this lifetime or ever, or really ever. Because I remember I was traveling in Thailand with the backpack, and I remember talking to this really well-researched guy that knew about all the history of the world and all the world wars, and I was asking him some of these deep questions about politics, and he was like, we'll never in our lifetime ever get to a place of peace unless our whole consciousness, global consciousness changes, because he says, if you look at some of the most peaceful civilizations, they were taken over at one point.
That's right.
So if we were to go, or even governments, when they finally found peace, a coup happened and they took over the government. So
but even Rome, like they found peace internally, and that's one of the reasons how they imploded. Yeah, because they allowed previous enemies into their lands and then they infiltrated. Anyway,
good point. No, but really good point. So I think for me to ground this into somebody that's listening, that's like, am I preoccupied with the global events? Or am I focusing in my house? Am I focused on me?
Focus on your house.
Am I focused on my relationship? Am I focused on my kiddos? Am I focused on my community, my tribe that I'm surrounding myself? Because I feel like that is where we have power now. That is something we don't have powerful. And if so, that you want to get involved, then go get involved, but go after it, right? Like, so I feel like that's kind of the conversation. And I think that's the masculine pull of like, choose. Work here or work there, but go all in to whatever you're going to work on, you know?
Yeah, as you know, I'm a big fan of going all in, like either you're in or you're out. Like it's as simple as that, right? And I'm not black and white in every area of my life. I think I live far more grey than I do black and white. At least that's my perception of myself. I could be wrong. Maybe it's a little more equal, but but I think in this instance, like we've got to, when it comes to self work, you can dabble, you can touch in, you can dip your toe in, come back out. It's just not going to be effective. Mm-hmm. It's just not. And, you know, we've spoken to the dark side of the darker side of the dark masculine. There's a dark side to the dark, an unhealthy side to the dark feminine. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we touched on manipulation. I think manipulation sits in this category. I think this disdain and hate for the masculine and for men sits in this category, right? Mm-hmm. This wildness that exists, but which is to me, a beautiful aspect of the dark feminine. But when we get into the unhealthy aspects of the dark feminine, that wildness turns into entitlement. I think that entitlement then turns into, you know, you spoke about the savage man earlier, but I see the savage man. Well, there's always two components to it. Like there's the healthy savage and the unhealthy savage, right? Like this, it's this, I'll have at any cost and I'll hurt people at any cost and I'll wield my physicality, my sexuality at any cost and I will get what I want and I will manipulate the situation. And again, this is the feminine aspect to me of this dark side, and the I think the healthy dark side is this deep connection to self, this unbridled. Well, I would say the unhealthy expression is unbridled self-expression, but the dark feminine, you know, healthy expression knows herself, knows her timidness, knows her wildness, has range, can ask for what she wants, make really powerful requests, and know herself, not hold shame in her body. I think the darker side of the dark feminine holds a lot of shame, and instead of transmuting that, which the dark feminine does exceptionally well, she uses that as a weapon. And so and this interplay in maybe romantic partnerships and even just energetically, generally speaking, in the world, I find it extremely fascinating.
Yeah, me too. And I think there's I kind of see it as a split where either like what we're using is the dark side of the masculine to the feminine, which is very similar textures. Like if we look at it, they both hold
Yeah, yeah.
shame.
Yeah.
They're both
Yeah, for sure.
looking to acquire
Just in
power.
slightly different ways, right?
Slightly different energetics, but they're both wanting to accumulate power. And then there's a whole flip side, which is like the passive, which is the shutdown passive, I would say good man, but he's lacking his balls. Like he's lacking his
lacking
edge.
courage and confidence.
He's lacking
edge.
courage, confidence. He's lacking his authenticity.
Doesn't know himself.
Yeah, he's both sides don't know himself. It's just this side is like thinks he knows himself and is boldly claiming to the world under a false architecture,
Arrogance, narcissism.
under an arrogant, narcissistic nature. This side has lost all and surrendered all power away, full power, no power. And I see the same thing with the feminine, right? Where there's a full power and then there's another side that's totally surrendered but has no boundaries, has no walls, has no self-respect. And it's the same thing with men, where they really don't have boundaries, self-respect, self-trust, know myself. And I see the same thing with feminine. And oftentimes one side flips to the other side, right? When we're like, hey, I've been victimized because I've been a good man. I've been trying to do the best I can. And everybody keeps taking advantage of me. And now, oh, fuck this. I'm going to go to power. Let me flip side of this. And now I'm angry at the world from everything they've taken from me. And that victimization, we become the villain. And I see it the same way with the feminine, where oftentimes that dark side came from the flip side, where I was attacked or I was abused or I was taken
It's a
advantage
slingshot
of.
effect.
And so instead of doing the work to heal and process and move
Protective
through,
strategy.
it's a predictation to go, well, instead of opening, I'm going to just shut it down and put on armor and go to war and go destroy everybody that's ever been in my path.
Destruction.
Destruction.
That's what it is.
So it's armored up destruction on both sides. It's like most superhero movies. The villain and the hero came from the same trauma. It's just how do we internalize that? Do we want to go, which I even think the villain, or excuse me, the hero is often a savior. So it's not even fully depicted as like an integrated, it's either you're the savior or you're the villain. Like they don't show the integration in all of our movies growing up. Like they show the savior often, which is like, I think it's embedded into our cultures. I think that's even why some of the relationship dynamics get messed up, because we're waiting to either be the hero
Savior.
or they're waiting for the savior. So there's
Disney
expectation.
set us up very well.
Yeah, right. Disney's like, oh, no, you need to be the savior in order to get the girl. Or the woman's waiting for the savior, where she's now a victim waiting for the savior to come save her. So we're having to break, which is a great story format, right? It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, it's action packed. So you just got me thinking about something. So genuine hero. Does a character in the movies, in stories, exist that's a genuine, healthy hero that you can think of? I'm just trying to think of one.
That's a great question. I think it's
Can you name any?
the only one that kind of comes to mind, but again, it's still a little bit of a savior dynamic, which is a little bit tricky. But it's a war movie, and I'm blanking the movie right now, where it's not Saving Private Ryan. It's basically about this band that goes in and keeps saving people that are dying. Hacksaw Ridge.
I haven't seen that one.
So the one part that shows up in me is he was doing it for God, and to me that's why the difference lies. Yeah. He wasn't doing it to save the men necessarily to save the men. He was trusting his divine wisdom of God, and God was telling him, "You need to go do this." And I think that's the difference of like most saviors. Like if I look at most heroes, are depicted of trying to save the person to save them. Right. But they're not following kind of a deeper set of guidance to do it. They're doing it. Man. So for me, that's like when you asked that question, I was like, what discerns if it's an actual hero versus not? One is following a set of values of like, this is who I am in the world, or this is where I'm getting led to go do it, versus
by something greater than themselves.
Greater than themselves versus I'm doing this. And then most heroes become the ego. If you watch most of their movies, you know, like, which I love them all and I watch them all, but like at some level, they're this powerful Superman, which has his ego he's now fighting. Or if you see Aquaman and he's like, he even gets, and which is accentuated in our society, like, oh, I want to be Aquaman. I want to be these guys, but they're very ego based in the characters. What I loved about that Hacksaw Ridge is it was just a really simple man who was following God's guidance and didn't even want the credit for it, was just wanting to go, this is what I was taught to do. It saved a bunch of lives. And then went back to his life. So there's like a Like, why are we doing the thing? Are we doing the scene to be the hero, which feels good? I got to say, as a man, like when you can show up and make a difference or save. I had a savior pattern for most of my life. So that's the part I've been
Same.
really working on healing. And it's tied to our identity, but it lacks a, why am I doing it? I'm doing it to get my needs met. So I'm doing it to get at some level versus doing it just
The
because
intrinsic value of just doing it.
versus the intrinsic value of just doing it. So I feel like that's the distinction, at least what comes up for me in this conversation. What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, even with Hacksaw Ridge, I mean, I think I would guess very few people know that movie, right? It's not like but it's not a popularized character is a better way to say it. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're just illustrating my point. Like even I look at Superman, like Superman's need to save Earth and humanity is because his planet was blown up. So he wants to make sure that, and again, like you can look at that and say, okay, that's a great morality that he's taking on. Or you could possibly look at that and say, is that coming from an unresolved wound as well? You know, it's just interesting, which then begs the question. I don't necessarily think it's about being fully healed. I'm not concerned about being fully healed. In fact, I would argue and posit and say that we don't need to be fully healed at all. It's not about that. It's more about, are we on a journey of remembering and recognizing our wholeness? And as a part of that means that we have to explore the unknown or difficult aspects or uncomfortable aspects of ourselves, because we have that as human beings. Or we have access to this plethora of information and ways of being in the world, and some of it's comfortable and some of it's not. Some of it's uncomfortable. And if we're averse to discomfort, then I think we're missing out on an integral part of our lives, right? And this isn't a criticism towards the heroes. And maybe it's healthy to have a certain amount of quote unquote wound, but being aware of it and choosing in as many moments as you need to not to live from that is life. Like is the life, like is the living that we need to be doing. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. How I'm relating to this is I'm even just thinking about, my story around grief and loss, and that I spent over a decade trying to save the world, not knowingly, unconsciously. And I know part of each of our own hero's journey is oftentimes our wound is what part of the gift we give to the world.
For sure. And voids become our values, right?
So there's a big piece of that, but I think I'm learning on my journey, like, it's like that became my identity. And then I was trapped in an identity that I was good at, but it didn't necessarily mean that was the continual direction.
Yeah.
And I feel like the surrender of that to being like, what's this next season?
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe there's seasons, and like maybe we all go through the journey when we're healing our wounds that we play the savior or we play the victim or we play the villain to like really understand it and have compassion for it.
Yeah.
And then I feel like there's another season where we almost kind of remove ourselves from all of it. And I feel like that's we're both going through like a tunnel right now. Like letting go of all of our identity and our architecture. And then meanwhile, while some of that's happening, I'm forming more identity. Like I'm seeing there's parts of me letting go of who am I? And then there's other parts of my identity that are coming online that are like, who's this guy? And maybe it's just also age, time, seasons where I'm like, oh, I want longevity now. I don't want to run sprints anymore because I keep breaking. So maybe it's also like, I would keep running sprints if I could. Like that metaphor of a sprint of like driving, pushing until exhaustion.
Yeah.
But my body's breaking, so I'm having to like adapt to that and go, okay, what's longevity? How do I take care of myself?
What does it look like for you? Yeah.
So I think that's the new kind of season that I'm looking at is like, what's this next season look like?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So firstly, it's interesting that I think we do need to try on these different identities. It's almost that old school of thought of God created humanity in this form so that God could experience the infinite number of ways that physical form expresses itself, And so I think part of that is us playing the villain, is playing the savior, is playing the victim, is playing the hero, is playing the perpetrator, is all of it, right? If we look at the drama triangle as an example. I'd also say come from really matters. Mm-hmm. So, you spent well over a decade saving the world, wanting to save the world unconsciously. The reality is you're not doing really, in terms of outward projection, you're not doing anything massively different to what you were doing 10 years ago. You're working with clients, you're supporting people on their own journey, but your come from is different.
True.
You know what I'm saying? Like you're still connected to your craft. You're still connected to your service. You're still connected to your career, whatever you want to call it, all the different names. You're still helping people. You're still in personal transformation, psychology, personal development, trauma, somatics. Like you're still doing all that, but your come from is different. Now, here's something interesting. Isn't it interesting that you are probably most externally successful than you've ever been? And isn't it interesting that your come from has drastically changed? Successful not only in your work, but also in your relationship to self and your relationship, your romantic, all of it. Isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting. And I think that's what I was pointing on earlier is the whole point of previous was I was wanting to accumulate and I couldn't get it. And then I would work harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
And I was eluding me. And now the come from is different. And now I'm getting the things and I have all the things that I wanted. And then the challenge is that's what I thought would give me the significance I wanted.
It does.
And it's not.
I know.
And so I'm sitting here like, oh wait, I thought when I got this and this and this and this that I would, and I'm like, but that's not it. And I've seen it with a lot of my clients that are like financially free and they're, but now I'm experiencing those same levels and going, which is making me reassess like what am I doing with my time? What is the meaning of life? Like, you know, and I think I'm coming more to a grounded place of like, oh, I get to be happy too, which is the place of like, I was missing that before.
Well, you spend a lot of years blaming yourself and not being happy. I know you've spoken openly to that, you know, like that's, and that's a beautiful place where you are right now to realize that, you know, essentially ipso facto worthiness.
That's it. The recurring theme in any conversation we're ever going to do is coming back to like self-worth.
Self-worth, self-esteem,
which I think what we're all doing. I think we're all here on a journey of like worthiness at some level and like learning to love ourselves and learning to value ourselves and appreciate. And I would even say that's the big shift I find with women. And that's the big shift I find with men is like when we develop self-respect, when we develop self-love, when we develop trust, our standards go up. Like who we let into our space. Yeah. We prune more. We say no to more. We are like
way more no's. They lead to better. They lead to high quality yeses.
Yeah, because we value ourselves and we want to surround ourselves with what matches that vibration, which is going to accelerate us or complement us, and it changes the whole perspective. I have one more quick thing I want to talk about because I'm curious to get your perspective on it. So, this concept of leaky energy, I've talked about it with men and I think that's pretty obvious with men. Like we have leaky energy. Like, well, I want to get your perspective on men and women's leaky energy. And I'll share mine and I'm curious to get yours. For me, leaky energy is when we're not fully in control of ourselves and our direction and where our attention is at. So as an example, I'm not dealing with my past trauma or past grief. I haven't learned how to nurture myself. So when I need nurture, when I'm driving too high, I get a quick hit from Instagram. I get a quick hit from liking, following, commenting. I may be in a relationship, but I'm getting it over here somewhere. I could be in a relationship. I could be playing. I could be on dating apps. I could be having sex. It could even be as subtle as I'm in a committed relationship and I notice a beautiful woman and I go engage in a beautiful woman without being in control of what my intention is around that. So for me, that's the leaky energy of the masculine at some core level. My experience of the leaky energy with the feminine is when they're using their sexual energy to get. So at some level as a man, we're trying to get on the leaky energy and the feminine's using it to get. And to me, there's a big distinction. When I see a woman, she could be in her sexual energy, she could be in her sensual energy, she could be in the range of it, but the texture feels very different when it's for her than when I feel the texture of a woman who's actually wanting to get something from it. I can now feel the discernment between the two. And to me, that's what it could be all the same things as the masculine, going somewhere else with their energy, but it's a different attunement of they're using also their amazing, beautiful body and showing something from that to get some sort of an energy. And I can now feel it in even social media where I couldn't before. I think about as I've created more boundaries, I now can almost feel like, oh, before I was like hijacked, like, oh, what is this? And now it's like a little repulsive to me.
With very little assessment.
I had no assessment before. I just was hijacked and already in it and giving my energy there because I needed that as well. And now I know I'm like, oh, that feels different, or wow, that feels really beautiful. And I notice one pulls me in to observe or compliment when I feel a woman has high self-respect and she's doing it for her. And the other one, I feel like she's doing it to get. I I have a little bit more of a repulsion now because I feel like, oh, you want something from me. I'm curious your thoughts on that and what the difference between leaky men's sexual energy and leaky women's sexual energy is and how that feels to you.
Yeah, well, firstly, I resonate with everything you've said. Leaky energy for me is compensatory, out of integrity, and in a hiding energy, vested in shame. In other words, lacking self-worth. So for me, I'll generally speak to leaky energy. I'll speak to those four big pieces. So the lack of integrity is where you're dishonest with others and dishonest with yourself, and it's all about self-gratification. The compensatory is that you're, as you've mentioned, you're running from or hiding from something within yourself, an unaddressed, unprocessed, unresolved wound or series of wounds that are being compensated through high peak pleasurable experiences such as sex. And you will use your body, i.e. promiscuity, to get that. As a woman, you're going to be more open and you're going to just let everyone into your energy field and into physically. As a man, you're going to penetrate and you're going to do it in disrespectful ways. You're going to be intrusive. That's that sort of leaky energy. You're going to be sleazy. You're not going to be honest. You're not going to be transparent. The other part about hiding is that most leaky energy, again, comes from a place of dishonesty. So you're either going to be in relationship and pursuing other partners sexually, emotionally, etc., because you're not addressing the wounds that you have. You lack a capacity to be honest with your partner. And if you're not in partnership, you're maybe doing that with if you're a man, series of women, and you're not telling them. You're not being honest with yourself. You lack an ability to be honest with yourself. So that leaky energy is, as you mentioned, the word control. You are being controlled by your biological impulses and your psychological, emotional, and relational impulses as well to naturally, in a compensatory way, avoid the pain that you're not willing to deal with. And let me tell you something, man. As you know, orgasm, sex, the pursuit, the anticipation, the dopamine effect, physiologically, hormonally, that occurs when you're in newness, novelty, and variety is very attractive. That's roughly what I think about leaky energy.
Man, I love that. It was very condensed and very deep. It was like a sledgehammer, like wham.
Well, you know, a nickname used to be a sledgehammer in the back in Australia.
Really?
Yeah.
Yours was?
They used to call me a sledgehammer because I was just rude and obnoxious and direct, and it wasn't a compliment.
I love that.
It wasn't
Sledgehammer.
a compliment. I was nasty. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the reason it's important, and I want to drill down on a couple of things you said, is dishonest. And I think that's the number one thing is where, like anybody who's listening, where are we being dishonest? And can we take a really good inventory, even the subtle things?
Oh, yeah.
Even because I think sometimes the subtle things are what create the shame, but then create the larger things that happen because we're beating ourselves up and shaming ourselves up for the smaller areas. So it's a continual practice of being more authentic.
That's a powerful word, authenticity and being genuine. Because I think if you embody authenticity, or at least the embodiment of that, the intention to embody that and the pursuit of that, and you're being true to yourself, as uncomfortable as it can be, and true and as by default true with others because you value others simultaneously, I call it selfish selflessness, then the space for leaky energy doesn't occur. And if you're really addressing the maladaptive coping strategies that you've created over time to survive, of course, but that may no longer serve you as an adult now, if you're addressing those and working with those and helping yourself be accountable, we need people in our lives that can call us forward, challenge us, hold us in loving ways, all of that. And if we have those people in our lives, we ensure a better version of ourselves coming through, and that leaky sexual or that leaky emotional energy, that dishonest, cheating energy, if you like, for that short-term gratification and that masking of pain, it lessens. It's just less in our lives.
And then when it's less in our lives, we can actually start hunting big game, which is like, what's our deeper purpose? What's our deeper meaning?
Yeah.
What's my legacy?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's my mark on the world?
Yeah.
And how do I be spending my time? Like 80% on that, which is really what's gonna matter in life. What's gonna matter when I'm gone?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting question, man. What's going to matter when I'm gone? I think about that often, brother. I really do, especially again with having a baby girl. How do I want to be? And part of it comes from my ego. Part of it comes from just wanting to be a better human. not from my ego. I think it's both for me, and I'll own that. And it's a really interesting question, and I don't have a definitive response to that at this point in time. I can skirt around it, but it's not definitive for me.
Yeah, and I think I'm in exploration of that. I think for the longest time that was my mark on grief and trauma, and I had these big missions, and then now I've kind of dissolved some of that and being like, I don't know, can I sit in the unknown of what this next chapter looks like? But I do know I am more clear on like I would like to have a family. I would like to share what I'm learning with little child. You know, I would like to have family unit.
Blessings,
I would like
brother.
to have. So I'm like getting clearer and clearer on what that general path looks like going forward.
And I want to commend you, man, on the way I've seen you lately with people you're bringing into your life, women you're bringing into your life, and being really honest to yourself and truthful to yourself so that you can get closer to what you truly wish to live through in this life and what you value most, which is family. And just, having the courage to say no to what's not serving you.
Thank you. And I appreciate your support, invitation, challenge when I needed it, being there for me, ride or die when I've needed it in some messy situations, and just really, really grateful for you, man. I'm feeling happier. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Such a great
it shows on your skin. You look good.
Thank you.
I love you, man.
Love you too, brother.
Yeah.